In just 47 seconds of leaked audio, Eric Adams destroyed his own political career and handed Zohran Mamdani the most devastating campaign ammunition in New York political history. The recording was worse than anyone imagined. Adams didn't just question Mamdani's policies, he attacked his faith, his family, and his right to exist as an American. What did Adams say in that private donor dinner that made his own staff resign in disgust and turned every major newspaper in America against him? October 18, 2025, 7:32 p.m. The Metropolitan Club on East 60th Street, Manhattan's most exclusive private club, where billionaires dine on $200 steaks while deciding the fate of 8 million New Yorkers. The marble columns and crystal chandeliers have witnessed a century of backroom deals, but nothing like what was about to unfold in the club's private dining room. Eric Adams sat at the head of a mahogany table surrounded by 22 of New York's wealthiest donors, real estate magnates, hedge fund titans, and corporate executives who'd collectively donated $4.7 million to Adams's campaign and expected results for their investment. The dinner was supposed to be off-the-record strategy session about stopping Mamdani's insurgent campaign. What Adams didn't know was that Isabella Martinez, a server working her way through law school, had accidentally left her phone recording in her pocket. The same Isabella whose grandmother Rosa had worn that wedding ring for 63 years, who'd built her life on the principle that America was a country where anyone could belong. She was about to capture the most damaging political recording since Donald Sterling. The conversation started innocuously enough. Adams was explaining his tough-on-crime record, his business-friendly policies, his plan to defeat Mamdani in the November election. The donors nodded approvingly, occasionally interjecting with questions about public safety and tax policy. Then real estate developer Bradley Hoffman asked the question that changed everything. "Eric, what do we really know about this Mamdani character? I mean, his background, his loyalties, his associations." The dog whistle was clear. Hoffman wasn't asking about policy positions or political experience. He was asking about Mamdani's religion, his immigrant background, his Muslim identity. And Adams, feeling comfortable among his wealthy white donors, took the bait completely. "Look, Brad," Adams began, his voice taking on the conspiratorial tone of someone sharing state secrets. "I've been in law enforcement for 22 years. I know how to read people, how to assess threats. And I'm telling you, Zohran Mamdani represents everything that's dangerous about unchecked immigration and radical Islam in this country." The room fell silent except for the clink of wine glasses. Adams was just getting started. "This isn't some kid from Queens who wants to help working families," Adams continued, his voice growing more animated. "This is a sophisticated operative who uses democratic socialism as cover for a much more sinister agenda. His father is Mahmoud Mamdani. You know who that is? A Marxist professor who spent decades undermining American values at Columbia University." Isabella, clearing plates near the table, felt her hands trembling. She'd studied constitutional law, civil rights, and American history. She knew exactly what Adams was doing, the same dehumanization tactics used against every immigrant community in American history. "But here's what really concerns me," Adams said, leaning forward like he was about to reveal classified intelligence. "Mamdani's family has connections throughout the Muslim world, Uganda, Pakistan, the Middle East. When someone with those kinds of international ties starts talking about dismantling American capitalism, we need to ask ourselves, who is he really working for?" The conspiracy theory was breathtaking in its scope and racist assumptions. Adams was suggesting, without evidence, that Mamdani was some kind of foreign agent because his family had lived in multiple countries and he happened to be Muslim. Hedge fund manager David Steinberg nodded gravely. "What kind of vetting do these people go through? I mean, when they run for office?" "That's exactly the problem, David," Adams replied, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "The vetting is minimal. Anyone can run for mayor as long as they're citizens and meet basic residency requirements. But citizenship doesn't guarantee loyalty, especially when someone's allegiances might lie with radical Islamic ideology rather than American values." Isabella was recording everything. Her phone, tucked in her apron pocket, was capturing every word of Adams, systematically questioning whether Muslim Americans could be loyal citizens. The same arguments used against Irish Catholics in the 1800s, Jewish immigrants in the early 1900s, and Japanese Americans during World War II. Real estate attorney Michael Bloomberg Jr., nephew of the former mayor, raised his wine glass. "Eric, what's your assessment of the actual security risk? I mean, if this guy becomes mayor, what are we looking at?" Adams paused dramatically, as if weighing classified information. Mike, I'll be honest with you. I've had conversations with federal law enforcement about monitoring certain communities, certain mosques, certain individuals who preach anti-American rhetoric. Mamdani's mosque in Astoria has been on various watch lists for years. The lie was devastating and completely fabricated. There were no federal watch lists targeting Mamdani's mosque. Adams had invented a national security threat to justify his political opposition to a democratic socialist who wanted to tax millionaires. Now, I'm not saying he's a terrorist, Adams continued, holding up his hands as if he was being reasonable. I'm saying he represents a cultural and ideological threat to everything that made New York great. This is a guy who openly celebrates Muslim holidays in government buildings, who wants Islamic law principles integrated into city policy, who sees America as fundamentally flawed rather than fundamentally good. Every word was a lie, designed to stoke fear and prejudice among wealthy donors who wanted justification for opposing policies that might increase their taxes. Corporate lawyer Patricia Whitman asked, "What about his support among young voters? The polling shows him leading with under 35 demographics." "Patty, that's the most dangerous part," Adams replied, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a complex conspiracy. Young people, especially young Muslim Americans and immigrants, see Mamdani as their champion. They don't understand that his vision of America, where Islamic values influence public policy, where wealth is redistributed according to socialist principles, where traditional American culture is systematically dismantled, that vision represents an existential threat to everything our grandparents built. The fusion of Islamophobia and economic anxiety was textbook political manipulation. Adams was telling wealthy donors that opposing tax increases was patriotic duty rather than self-interest. "I've seen this playbook before," Adams continued, warming to his theme. "First they run on economic justice and social equality. Then they start demanding accommodation for Islamic practices in schools, workplaces, government buildings. Before you know it, you've got Sharia law principles influencing American jurisprudence and American democracy subordinated to Islamic ideology." The slippery slope fallacy was staggering. Adams was suggesting that electing a Muslim mayor would somehow lead to Islamic theocracy in New York City, a conspiracy theory so absurd that even some donors looked uncomfortable. But Adams wasn't finished with his character assassination. "And let's talk about his so-called democratic socialism," he said, making air quotes with obvious disdain. "This isn't European-style social democracy. This is wealth confiscation justified by religious obligation. In Islamic theology, extreme wealth inequality is considered sinful. Mamdani's wealth tax isn't economic policy, it's religious law dressed up as progressive politics." The theological interpretation was completely wrong, but Adams knew his audience wouldn't fact-check Islamic teachings. He was counting on their prejudice and ignorance to sell his conspiracy theory. Isabella felt sick to her stomach. She was witnessing the systematic dehumanization of a fellow American whose only crime was running for office while Muslim. Her grandmother Rosa had faced similar prejudice as a Mexican immigrant, but this felt even more dangerous because it was coming from the mayor himself. "So what's our strategy?" asked venture capitalist Robert Chen. "How do we educate voters about these risks without seeming, without seeming racist?" Adams finished the sentence with a knowing smile. "Rob, that's the beauty of focusing on ideology rather than identity. We don't attack Mamdani for being Muslim, we attack him for promoting Islamic supremacist policies. We don't criticize his immigrant background, we question his American loyalties." The strategy session was becoming a masterclass in coded racism and religious bigotry. Adams was teaching his donors how to express prejudice in politically acceptable language. "Here's what I need from all of you," Adams said, looking around the table. "Financial support, obviously, but also amplification. When I criticize Mamdani's foreign influences and anti-American agenda, I need you to echo those themes in your business networks, your social circles, your media contacts." Real estate mogul Stephen Ross nodded enthusiastically. "Eric, you can count on us. This Mamdani situation is bigger than one election. This is about preserving American civilization against Islamic infiltration and socialist subversion." The language was becoming explicitly white nationalist. These weren't dog whistles anymore, they were foghorns. Adams had given his donors permission to express the most extreme anti-Muslim conspiracy theories under the guise of political strategy. "Exactly, Stephen," Adams replied, "and we need to be especially careful about media coverage. Mamdani's people are sophisticated. They'll try to frame our legitimate security concerns as religious bigotry. That's their playbook. Cry Islamophobia whenever anyone questions Islamic ideology's compatibility with American democracy. Adams was preemptively trying to discredit any accusations of bigotry by claiming that pointing out bigotry was itself a political tactic. The circular logic was dizzying but effective among people who wanted to feel justified in their prejudices. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. Adams shared more fabricated intelligence about Mamdani's foreign connections, more conspiracy theories about Islamic influence in American politics, more strategies for attacking a political opponent's religion without technically violating civil rights laws. Isabella listened to every word, her phone capturing audio that would change American politics forever. When the dinner finally ended, and the donors departed in their black cars and private jets, she walked to the staff bathroom and listened to the recording with tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother Rosa had taught her that America was special because it welcomed people from everywhere, because it judged individuals by their actions rather than their ancestry or faith. What she just recorded was the antithesis of everything Rosa had believed about American possibility. Isabella made 3 decisions in that bathroom stall. First, she would transcribe every word of the recording for accuracy. Second, she would contact investigative journalists who could verify the audio and protect her identity. Third, she would honor her grandmother's memory by ensuring that bigotry disguised as political strategy wouldn't succeed in silencing democracy. The next morning, Isabella contacted Katie Honan at The City, the same reporter who'd broken the Eric Adams corruption stories. Honan had built a reputation for meticulous fact-checking and source protection, exactly what Isabella needed. I have audio recording of Mayor Adams making explicitly Islamophobic statements about Zohran Mamdani at a private donor dinner, Isabella told Honan over an encrypted phone call. This isn't political opposition. This is religious discrimination and conspiracy theories about Muslim Americans. Honan requested authentication verification, timestamps, location details, background audio that would confirm the setting. Isabella provided everything along with photos of the event setup and guest list she'd seen as a server. The authentication process took 3 days. Audio forensics experts confirmed the recording was unedited and genuine. Voice analysis verified Adams' speech patterns and vocal signatures. Location audio matched the acoustics of the Metropolitan Club's private dining room. On October 23, 5 days after the dinner and 13 days before the election, the city published the bombshell investigation. Exclusive. Mayor Adams caught on audio making Islamophobic conspiracy claims about rival. The story included partial transcripts, audio excerpts, and detailed fact-checking that debunked every conspiracy theory Adams had shared with his donors. The impact was immediate and devastating. Within hours, Adams' recording was trending on Twitter with over 2.3 million interactions. The audio excerpts were shared across every social media platform, played on every news program, and discussed in every political podcast. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow spent 30 minutes breaking down the recording's implications for American democracy. This isn't just political mudslinging, she said. This is a sitting mayor spreading conspiracy theories about a political opponent's religion and questioning whether Muslim Americans can be loyal citizens. CNN's Anderson Cooper interviewed constitutional law experts who explained how Adams' statements violated both the spirit and letter of civil rights protections. Public officials cannot use religious identity as grounds for questioning American citizenship or loyalty, explained Georgetown Law's David Cole. Fox News faced an unprecedented challenge: how to defend Adams' Islamophobia without explicitly endorsing religious discrimination. Tucker Carlson tried to reframe the controversy as political correctness while avoiding direct quotes from the recording that would expose the conspiracy theories. The reaction from Muslim American organizations was swift and unified. The Council on American Islamic Relations called Adams' statements textbook Islamophobia that echoes the worst periods of American religious discrimination. The Islamic Society of North America demanded his immediate resignation. Jewish organizations joined the condemnation, recognizing the historical parallels to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The Anti-Defamation League issued a statement. Mayor Adams' suggestions that Muslim Americans cannot be loyal citizens because of their faith mirrors accusations historically made against Jewish Americans and other religious minorities. Civil rights organizations mobilized immediately. The ACLU of New York announced they were reviewing Adams' record for potential civil rights violations. The NAACP reminded Americans that religious freedom was fundamental to constitutional democracy. But the most devastating response came from Adams' own administration. Within 24 hours of the story breaking, 4 senior officials resigned in protest.
Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives Anna Almanzar submitted her resignation with a brutal letter. I cannot serve in an administration where religious bigotry masquerades as political strategy. Mayor Adams's comments represent everything I believed America had moved beyond. Police Commissioner Keechant Sewell, already facing pressure over police reform issues, distanced herself from Adams's comments in a carefully worded statement. The NYPD serves all New Yorkers regardless of religion, ethnicity, or political affiliation. We do not engage in surveillance of religious communities based on theological beliefs. The resignation that hurt Adams most came from school's Chancellor David Banks, his longtime friend and ally. Banks' departure letter was personal and painful. Eric, I've known you for 30 years. I believed in your vision for New York. But I cannot reconcile the man who spoke at that dinner with the public servant I thought I knew. Religious bigotry is incompatible with educational leadership. The political earthquake reached Albany within hours. Governor Kathy Hochul, who'd maintained careful neutrality in the mayoral race, issued a strong condemnation. These statements are contrary to New York's values and have no place in public discourse. State Attorney General Letitia James announced a formal review of whether Adams' statements constituted civil rights violations. Public officials who use religious identity to question American citizenship may be violating federal and state civil rights statutes. The federal response was equally swift. The Department of Justice issued a rare statement about local politics. Federal law prohibits government officials from discriminating against citizens based on religious affiliation or suggesting that religious identity affects American loyalty. President Biden, campaigning in Pennsylvania, was asked about the Adams recording during a press conference. His response was unequivocal. Religious freedom is fundamental to American democracy. Any elected official who questions citizens' loyalty based on their faith betrays the constitutional oath they swore to uphold. The international reaction was equally damaging. The BBC ran the Adams story as their lead international segment, framing it as evidence of rising Islamophobia in American politics. Al Jazeera interviewed American Muslim leaders who connected Adams' comments to broader patterns of discrimination. European newspapers contrasted Adams's bigotry with their own integration challenges, suggesting that American democracy was struggling with religious diversity. The Guardian's editorial asked, if America's most diverse city cannot elect Muslim leaders without conspiracy theories, what does this say about American pluralism? But the most important response came from Zohran Mamdani himself. On the evening of October 23rd, he held a press conference at the Islamic Center of New York in Manhattan, the same mosque where Malcolm X had spoken 60 years earlier. Mamdani stood at the podium flanked by religious leaders from every faith tradition. Rabbis, priests, ministers, and imams united in defending religious freedom. His response was measured, dignified, and devastating in its moral clarity. Mayor Adams' recorded statements represent more than personal bigotry. Mamdani began, his voice steady and professorial. They represent a fundamental misunderstanding of American democracy and constitutional government. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Let me be clear about who I am and what I believe. I am an American citizen who happens to be Muslim. My faith informs my commitment to social justice, but my policies are grounded in constitutional law and empirical evidence, not religious doctrine. The factual rebuttal was systematic and precise. Mayor Adams claimed my mosque has been on federal watch lists. This is false. Mayor Adams suggested my family has suspicious international connections. My father is a respected academic whose scholarship on democracy and development has influenced policy worldwide. Mamdani's voice gained strength as he addressed the broader implications. But this isn't really about me or my family. This is about whether Muslim Americans or any religious minority can participate fully in American democracy without having their loyalty questioned, their faith distorted, and their patriotism challenged. The constitutional analysis that followed was devastating. The First Amendment protects religious freedom precisely because our founders understood that religious tests for public office would undermine democratic governance. Mayor Adams' recorded statements violate both the letter and spirit of constitutional democracy. Then Mamdani delivered the line that would define his entire campaign. To Mayor Adams and anyone who shares his views, I say this. My grandmother wears hijab and recites the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. My father studies democracy and teaches constitutional law. My mother makes documentaries about American immigrant experiences. We are not foreign infiltrators. We are American citizens building the more perfect union our Constitution envisions. The crowd erupted in sustained applause. Not just Muslim Americans, but New Yorkers of every background, who understood that attacking one community's citizenship threatened everyone's democracy. Social media response was immediate and overwhelming. We Are American Too began trending with millions of posts from Muslim Americans sharing their stories of service, sacrifice, and citizenship. Military veterans, teachers, Doctors and small business owners posted photos and testimonials demonstrating their deep American roots. The narrative had completely flipped. What began as Adams trying to question Mamdani's loyalty had become a national conversation about religious freedom and American identity. Adams looked like a bigot. Mamdani looked like a constitutional scholar defending democracy itself. Polling numbers shifted dramatically overnight. A Siena College poll conducted October 24-25 showed Mamdani leading Adams by 12 points, a 9-point swing from the previous week. More importantly, the crosstabs showed massive movement among moderate voters who'd been undecided. White college-educated voters moved toward Mamdani by 15 points. Jewish voters, initially skeptical due to foreign policy disagreements, shifted 11 points toward Mamdani, after Adams' conspiracy theories echoed historical anti-Semitic tropes. Even more devastating for Adams, black voters, his core constituency, showed significant movement toward Mamdani. African-American church leaders condemned Adams' religious bigotry as contrary to civil rights traditions. The Amsterdam News, New York's leading black newspaper, withdrew their Adams endorsement. The editorial was scathing. Eric Adams has forgotten that black Americans know what it means to have your loyalty questioned, your patriotism challenged, and your citizenship conditional on white approval. We cannot support a candidate who uses those same tactics against Muslim Americans. Corporate New York began distancing itself from Adams immediately. Major law firms canceled fundraising events. Wall Street executives who'd supported Adams privately expressed concerns about associating with religious discrimination. Even the donors from the Metropolitan Club dinner were panicking. Several reached out to Adams's campaign requesting their names be removed from supporter lists. Real estate developer Bradley Hoffman, whose question had prompted Adams's Islamophobic rant, issued a public apology. I asked inappropriate questions that prompted inappropriate responses. Religious background should never be relevant to political evaluation. I apologize to the Muslim American community and to Mr. Mamdani personally. The cascade of denunciations continued throughout the week. Every major newspaper in New York condemned Adams's statements. The New York Times editorial board called for his resignation. A mayor who spreads conspiracy theories about citizens' religious loyalties cannot effectively govern a diverse democracy. The New York Post, despite their conservative editorial stance, criticized Adams's un-American attacks on religious freedom. The Daily News ran a week-long series on Muslim American contributions to New York, effectively rebutting every stereotype Adams had perpetuated. Labor unions began withdrawing endorsements. The United Federation of Teachers, citing their commitment to religious diversity in schools, announced they could no longer support Adams's candidacy. The Transport Workers Union, representing subway and bus workers from dozens of countries and faiths, endorsed Mamdani instead. Religious leaders across New York united in unprecedented interfaith solidarity. Cardinal Timothy Dolan of the Catholic Archdiocese issued a statement defending Muslim Americans' right to political participation. Orthodox Jewish leaders in Brooklyn condemned conspiracy theories that questioned religious minorities' citizenship. The most powerful religious response came from Reverend Al Sharpton, whose National Action Network had initially remained neutral in the mayoral race. At his weekly Saturday rally in Harlem, Sharpton delivered a sermon connecting Adams's Islamophobia to historical discrimination against all minority communities. When they question whether Muslims can be loyal Americans, they're using the same playbook they used against Catholics, against Jews, against black folks who wanted full citizenship. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends, with all of us less free.
University campuses across New York erupted in solidarity demonstrations. Columbia University, where Mamdani's father taught, held a teach-in on religious freedom and constitutional democracy. NYU law school students organized a constitutional law symposium examining religious tests for public office. The academic response was particularly damaging to Adams because it highlighted his constitutional ignorance. Constitutional law professors published open letters explaining how Adams's recorded statements violated fundamental democratic principles. Harvard Law's Lawrence Tribe tweeted, "Mayor Adams's suggestion that Muslim citizens cannot be loyal Americans contradicts 2 centuries of constitutional jurisprudence and echoes the darkest periods of American religious discrimination." Yale Law School's Akhil Reed Amar published a New York Times op-ed titled "The Founders Would Be Appalled. The Constitution explicitly prohibits religious tests for public office, precisely because people like Mayor Adams existed in 1787. Americans who'd never thought deeply about religious freedom were learning about the Establishment Clause, the Free Exercise Clause, and the No Religious Test provision of Article 6. High school civics teachers used the Adams controversy as a real-time lesson in constitutional democracy. Students across the country studied the founding documents and discussed why religious freedom mattered for everyone, not just religious minorities. The educational impact extended internationally. American embassies around the world faced questions about religious freedom and democratic values. Diplomats had to explain how Adams' bigotry didn't represent American government policy or constitutional principles. Muslim-majority countries that had respected American democracy expressed concern about rising Islamophobia. The ambassador from Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim democracy, canceled a scheduled meeting with Adams during a New York visit. The damage to Adams's candidacy was irreparable, but he continued digging the hole deeper with increasingly desperate responses to the controversy. On October 26, he held a press conference attempting to defend his Metropolitan Club comments. "I stand by my concerns about radical ideology influencing American politics," Adams said, apparently unaware that he was confirming rather than denying his bigotry. Political correctness cannot prevent honest discussions about national security and ideological compatibility. The response was tone-deaf and inflammatory. Adams was doubling down on conspiracy theories while claiming to be the victim of political correctness, a strategy that might work with certain conservative audiences but was political suicide in diverse New York. Worse, Adams suggested that his opponents were using false accusations of racism to avoid legitimate policy debates. He seemed genuinely unable to understand that questioning citizens' loyalty based on religion wasn't policy debate, it was constitutional violation. The press conference backfired spectacularly. Rather than stopping the bleeding, Adams had reopened the wound and poured salt in it. Editorial boards that might have accepted a genuine apology now called his candidacy irredeemable. Political scientists began studying the Adams scandal as a case study in how quickly bigotry could destroy political careers in diverse democracies. The recording had done more than damage one campaign. It had clarified fundamental values for millions of Americans. CNN's political analyst Van Jones captured the broader significance. "This moment is forcing America to decide what we actually believe about religious freedom, democratic participation, and who gets to be considered a real American." The answer was becoming clear in polling data, campaign donations, and grassroots organizing. New Yorkers were rejecting Adams' bigotry and embracing Mamdani's constitutional vision of inclusive democracy. By November 1st, just 3 days before the election, Mamdani led Adams by 18 points in the final Quinnipiac poll. More importantly, voter registration had surged among young people, Muslim Americans, and immigrant communities, who saw the election as a referendum on their place in American democracy. The Adams recording had failed completely as political strategy. Instead of undermining Mamdani's candidacy, it had galvanized a coalition of Americans committed to religious freedom and constitutional democracy. On Election Day, November 4, 2025, New Yorkers delivered a devastating verdict on religious bigotry. Mamdani won by 23 points, the largest margin in a competitive New York mayoral election since 1969. Mamdani won 78% of Muslim voters, 71% of Jewish voters, 68% of Catholic voters, and 65% of Protestant voters. Religious communities that had never voted together united around constitutional principles. Young voters supported Mamdani by 84%, seeing his campaign as validation of their generation's commitment to inclusive democracy. College-educated voters backed him by 73%, responding to his constitutional expertise and policy competence. Even more remarkably, Mamdani won 58% of white voters citywide, a historical achievement for a Muslim candidate that reflected how completely Adams's bigotry had backfired. The international reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The BBC called Mamdani's victory a triumph for American constitutional democracy. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz congratulated New York on choosing inclusive leadership over divisive bigotry. Muslim-majority countries that had questioned American commitment to religious freedom praised the election results. The Prime Minister of Pakistan tweeted, "New York has shown the world that American democracy remains strong enough to reject prejudice and embrace diversity." On election night, Mamdani's victory speech at the Brooklyn Museum was a masterclass in constitutional democracy and religious freedom. Standing before a crowd that looked like New York itself, every race, religion, and ethnicity united in celebration, he delivered remarks that would be studied in civics classes for generations. Tonight, New Yorkers chose constitutional democracy over conspiracy theories, religious freedom over religious tests, and inclusive citizenship over exclusive nationalism, Mamdani declared to thunderous applause. To every American watching, regardless of faith or background, this victory belongs to you. Because when we defend any community's right to full citizenship, we defend everyone's right to participate in democracy. The recording that was supposed to destroy Mamdani's candidacy had instead destroyed Eric Adams' political career and strengthened American democracy. Isabella Martinez, watching from her law school dormitory, saw her grandmother Rosa's vision of America validated by 8 million votes. The lesson was clear. In a democracy governed by constitutional law, bigotry ultimately defeats itself. Truth, dignity, and democratic values had triumphed over fear, prejudice, and authoritarian tactics. Eric Adams had called Zohran Mamdani many things in that Metropolitan Club recording, but New Yorkers had heard him clearly and chosen differently. They'd chosen to judge their mayor by his character, competence, and constitutional commitment, exactly as American democracy intended. The recording that was meant to change everything had indeed changed everything, just not the way Adams planned. It had revealed the power of religious freedom, the strength of constitutional democracy, and the continuing promise of American pluralism. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a bigot can do is reveal who they really are. Eric Adams learned that lesson too late, and American democracy was stronger for his failure.